In 2011, researchers at the University of Cambridge scanned the brains of volunteers while showing them images of strangers in pain. The expected response: activation in the empathy networks, the regions associated with feeling what others feel. They got that response. Then they added one variable. They told the volunteers that the people in pain held different political views from their own. The empathy networks went quiet. Not partially quiet, not reduced, quiet. The brain had effectively switched off its capacity to feel another person's suffering in real time based on a single piece of social information. No hatred required, no cruelty required, no conscious decision, just a label. And the off switch flipped. We treat empathy as a virtue, a character trait, a moral quality. Something you either have or you don't. Something good people have more of. This framing is almost entirely wrong. Empathy is not a virtue. It is a neurological system. A measurable, mappable, scannable set of brain regions that activate when you perceive another being's experience and simulate it internally. The same mirror neuron system we discussed last time. The same simulation machinery. But empathy goes beyond motor simulation. It includes the anterior cingulate cortex, which processes emotional pain, the anterior insula, which processes disgust and visceral sensation, the temporoparietal junction, which constructs a model of other minds. These regions don't activate based on whether you are a good person or a bad person. They activate based on who your brain has classified as being within your circle of concern. And that circle, it turns out, is not fixed. It is not moral. It is not even conscious. It is a calculation, running constantly, below your awareness. And it can be manipulated by systems, by context, by information, in ways that are now being mapped with disturbing precision. The neuroscience of empathy was largely mapped in the early 2000s. Building on the mirror neuron discoveries of the 1990s, researchers began to understand that empathy is not one thing. It is at least two distinct systems operating in parallel. Affective empathy, feeling what another person feels. The automatic, involuntary response. You see someone cry, you feel something shift in your chest. You see someone in physical pain, you flinch. This system is fast, unconscious, and ancient. Cognitive empathy, understanding what another person feels without necessarily feeling it yourself. The ability to model another mind, to predict their emotional state, to take their perspective. This system is slower, more deliberate, and uniquely human. Most moral philosophy has focused on affective empathy, the feeling response, as the foundation of ethical behavior. But here is what the neuroscience shows. Affective empathy is not universal. It is not even consistent within a single person across different targets. The strength of your empathic response varies dramatically depending on who you are feeling it for. In 2009, researchers Xu, Zhuo, Wang, and Han published a study in the journal Neuroimage. They showed Chinese and Caucasian participants images of people from their own racial group and people from a different racial group experiencing pain. Brain activity was measured continuously. The result was stark and consistent across both groups. The pain matrix, the network of regions that activates when we perceive others' pain, showed significantly stronger activation for in-group members than for out-group members. For the Chinese participants, stronger response to Chinese faces. For the Caucasian participants, stronger response to Caucasian faces. Not because either group was racist in any conscious sense, but because the brain has an ancient automatic shortcut. People who look like me are more likely to be part of my group. People in my group are more relevant to my survival. Their pain is more actionable information for me. This is called the empathy gap, and it operates in every human brain regardless of consciously held values about equality. The person who sincerely believes all human suffering deserves equal weight shows a measurably stronger neural response to the suffering of people who look like them. Not because they are hypocrites, because their ancient brain is running a calculation their modern values have not yet overridden. Here is where it becomes actively disturbing. In 2006, psychologists Lasana Harris and Susan Fiske at Princeton University were studying the neural correlates of social perception. They showed participants images of various social groups and measured brain activity. For most social groups, even disliked ones, the medial prefrontal cortex activated. This region is associated with thinking about other people as people, attributing mental states, desires, intentions. When it activates, you are perceiving a human being. For two specific social groups, homeless people and drug addicts, it did not activate. Instead, the brain activated regions associated with objects and disgust. Not people, objects. The brain was not processing these groups as human beings with inner lives. It was processing them the way it processes a pile of garbage or a contaminated surface. Harris and Fiske called this infrahumanization, the neurological removal of human status from a perceived outgroup. And they found that it happened automatically, without conscious intention, in milliseconds, in people who would sincerely describe themselves as non-prejudiced. The empathy system doesn't switch off because people decide to be cruel. It switches off because the brain has been given enough information, through culture, media, language, repetition, to stop processing certain people as fully human. Understanding that empathy can be switched off through dehumanizing language explains something that historians have struggled with for a century. How do ordinary people participate in atrocities? We've asked this question since the Milgram experiment, since the Stanford prison experiment, since every genocide in recorded history. The answer is not that they become monsters. The answer is that the empathy switch gets flipped before the action is required. The Rwandan genocide of 1994, in which 800,000 people were killed in 100 days, was preceded by years of radio broadcasts calling the Tutsi people Inyenzi. Cockroaches? Not an insult. A reclassification. A systematic replacement of the word person with the word insect. By the time the killing began, the perpetrators' brains had been prepared. The medial prefrontal cortex response had been trained out of them by 10,000 repetitions of language that denied humanity. This is not unique to Rwanda. This is the consistent documented pattern of every mass atrocity in modern history. Step 1. Rename the group. Step 2. Repeat the rename until it feels true. Step 3. The empathy system stops activating. Step 4. What follows is no longer emotionally inhibited. Empathy is not just a feeling, it is a brake. And language is the mechanism by which that brake can be disabled. You don't need a genocide to see this mechanism at work. You need a Twitter feed. Research published in 2019 by William Brady and colleagues at New York University analyzed 2.7 million tweets and found a consistent pattern. Moral emotional language, words that combined moral judgment with emotional charge, increased the spread of a tweet by 20% per word. The algorithm rewarded content that triggered emotional moral responses. And the content that most reliably triggers emotional moral responses is content that defines an outgroup and attributes negative qualities to it. The modern social media feed is an empathy reduction engine. Every day it presents you with a curated selection of the most outrageous behavior of people who are not like you. Filtered for maximum emotional charge, optimized for the reaction that keeps you scrolling. And with every scroll, the brain receives a small dose of the same signal that radio broadcasts were delivering in Rwanda. Not at that intensity, not with those consequences. But the mechanism is identical. The neurological pathway is the same. The empathy gap widens one algorithmically optimized post at a time. In 2016, psychologist Paul Bloom at Yale published a book called Against Empathy that produced exactly the controversy its title promised. His argument was not that empathy is bad. His argument was that effective empathy, the feeling of another's pain, is a poor guide to moral action. Because effective empathy is parochial, it responds more strongly to individuals than to statistics. You will donate more to save one named child than to save 1,000 unnamed ones. The identified individual activates your empathy. The statistic does not enumerate, it cannot scale. You feel the suffering of one person acutely. You feel the suffering of 1,000,000 people approximately as much as you feel the suffering of one. Because the brain has no emotional representation for quantities above roughly 4 or 5 individuals. Biased, as we've discussed. It responds more strongly to in-group members. More strongly to people who are more like you. More strongly to people who are more physically present. Exhausting. It burns cognitive resources. Doctors, nurses, therapists, first responders who rely on effective empathy experience burn out at dramatically higher rates than those who develop cognitive empathy instead. The ability to understand without fully feeling. Bloom's argument is that the world needs less effective empathy and more rational compassion. Less feeling and more thinking about how to reduce suffering in ways that are effective rather than emotionally satisfying. This is one of the most contested ideas in contemporary moral psychology, and it is one of the most important. If empathy is a system that can be switched off, can it be switched on? The research suggests yes, with specific conditions. Contact theory, developed by Gordon Allport in 1954, proposed that prejudice decreases when members of different groups interact under specific conditions: equal status, common goals, institutional support, and personal interaction. 60 years of research have broadly confirmed this. Direct personal contact with outgroup members, not abstract information about them, not media representations of them, but actual human interaction, consistently reduces the empathy gap. The brain that has been shown the humanity of a person it previously categorized as other updates its model. The medial prefrontal cortex begins to activate again. The person becomes a person. This is why Jane Elliott's classroom worked. Not because she explained discrimination, but because she made her students feel it. From both sides. In their own bodies. This is why Zimbardo's guards were dehumanizing within 72 hours of entering an institution that treated their prisoners as numbers. The empathy system is not fixed. It is responsive to environment, to language, to contact, to story. The question is, in the current environment, which direction is it being pushed? Here is the uncomfortable question that this research leaves open. Right now, without any conscious decision on your part, your brain is running an empathy calculation on every person you encounter. Some people get the full response. Their suffering feels real to you. Their joy affects you. Their humanity is unquestioned. Other people get a reduced response. Their pain registers less. Their inner life seems less vivid. Their humanity is present in theory, but muted in practice. And you didn't decide this. Your culture decided it. Your media diet decided it. Your social environment decided it. The question is not, am I a good person? The question is, who has my environment trained me to process as less than fully human? And have I ever noticed? Because the empathy switch doesn't announce itself when it flips. It just gets quieter and quieter until the silence feels normal. On March 13, 1964, in the Kew Gardens neighborhood of New York City, a woman named Kitty Genovese was attacked and killed outside her apartment building. The attack lasted 35 minutes. 38 neighbors heard or saw some part of what happened. Not one called the police until it was over. The story, as it was reported, became one of the defining moral scandals of 20th century America. How could 38 people do nothing? Psychologists John Darley and Bibb Latané decided to find out. What they discovered had nothing to do with apathy, nothing to do with cruelty, nothing to do with New York City. It had to do with a mechanism so counterintuitive, so contrary to everything we assume about safety in numbers, that when you understand it, you will never feel safe in a crowd again in quite the same way. The more people who witness an emergency, the less likely any single one of them is to help. Not despite the crowd, because of it. That mechanism has a name, and it is operating every time you are in a group and something goes wrong. That is next.